Okay, so Rebecca, we've got the recording going. Just give everyone a few minutes to come to arrive. I'm sure there'll be a sudden flurry. There we go. Everyone's time. We're going to be covering such a vital topic. So this is the Africa Learning Community. This is the first session on a series of where we're going to focus in on entrepreneurship. And we're very privileged today to have Sibs Sibanda, and I'll introduce Sibs in a moment. But as I said, just to remind you that if you are French speaking and you would prefer to have access to French closed captions, there are the instructions. I'm not going to try and read the instructions to you. Maybe Dr. Esther Chengo can do that for you. And then if you are Portuguese speaking, then here are the instructions in Portuguese on how to set yourself up for closed captions in French or in Portuguese. And Rebecca has also pasted that into the chat so that if you have people arriving, then they can make reference. So just to give a little bit of the program flow, I'm just going to take a moment to set some context as to why we feel this is such an important topic for us to be covering as Movement Day Africa. Then I'm just going to take a moment to introduce Sibs, and then Sibs, really what you've come here to listen to Sibs. And then Sibs will speak for about 35 minutes on a subject that he's absolutely passionate and well equipped to speak about. We'll go into breakouts just to digest, and then we'll come back for a short response time, and then we'll have some closing remarks. So for those who are on any of our WhatsApp groups, you would have seen in the last couple of days we've been bombarding with some information and some sort of context setting and some provocation as to why we feel this is such an important topic for us to cover. There you can see that Africa's labor force will exceed 1 billion people by the year 2043. And the formal job creation being created by corporate or government, whoever, is far too slow. We need up to 20 million jobs per year in order to absorb all the job seekers, but we are only actually creating between 2.6 and 3 million jobs per year. So you need very basic mathematics to know that is not going to work. And of course, we know already that many Africans are working in informal, low-paying jobs. Up to 85% of jobs are informal, which leads to no protection and very few prospects of growth and opportunity. So entrepreneurship in the African context is not optional. It's essential. As I've said already, the governments and large companies cannot create jobs that are required at the correct scale. And so entrepreneurs should become the primary job creators. Small and growing businesses are one of the few realistic pathways to absorb the millions who will be entering the workforce each year in Africa. Now, any one of you who have read the Movement Day Africa-led book last year entitled Why African Cities, if you've read it and you've gone to chapter 7, you would have seen that the author of that chapter is Sibs Sibanda, and it's entitled Faith, Worship and Work in Africa, the Need for Integrated Lives. I've read the chapter more than once. I think it's outstanding. And you'll see from Sibs's bio that he was in ministry, pastoral ministry, for 20 years. And I don't want to put any words in Sibs's mouth, but he did at one point in one of our discussions say that he felt that he was guilty of pastoral or ministerial malpractice, because he was equipping people for Sunday and maybe Wednesday night prayer meeting, but he wasn't equipping people for all the other majority of hours that they were spending from Monday to Friday in the workplace. And so you can see that he now serves as a co-director of ePort, a software development company, is deeply passionate about the integration of faith and work, and continues to explore how Christian principles can meaningfully shape the marketplace, married, and lives in Harare, Zimbabwe, with his wife and 2 children. So Sibs today is not going to be telling an A to Z of how to do entrepreneurship. Sibs is going to really try and give us a biblical, spiritual understanding of God's design for work and why work is so important, that it's not something that's extra. It's not a distraction from ministry. It's actually part of God's design. So I don't want to take any more of your time, Sibs. We have prayed, and so I really want to hand over to you. And just before I hand over to you, I just want to make sure, Rebecca, is there anything else that we need to announce The recording is going. We're all on track. So, Sibs, thank you very much. It's a real privilege to have you speaking to the Movement Day Africa community, not only to those who are on the call, but also to those who will watch the video in due course. So, Sibs, over to you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be with you all. I want to just say up front, I'm going to go through a lot of material in quite a short space of time. So what I'll encourage you to do, don't try and digest everything, but just have your pen and paper and just note down specifically what God impresses on you, and that you can carry that forward into the discussion. Okay, so I apologize in advance, but yeah, let's get going. So I just want to start off by saying that the topic we are covering today is sometimes people think the integration of faith and work is a specialized topic for a few special people who are into that sort of thing. But I just want to point out that it's really about the essence of Christianity, which is love the Lord your God, love your neighbor, make disciples of all nations. We're not talking about anything other than that today. This is essentially what we're talking about. And this is summarized, of course, in the Westminster Shorter Catechism, which is a summary of evangelical doctrine summarized in question and answer format. And the first question in the catechism is, what is the chief end of man? In other words, why do we exist? Why are we here? And the answer, of course, is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. But if you take a look at the numbers, and you'll have to take my word for this, but if you're working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 40 years, that's approximately 75,000 hours or 9 years. And that's how much we rob God of his glory. Given that we exist to glorify him, that's how much we rob him of his glory if we don't actively glorify him in and through our work. Dorothy Sayers wrote an essay, and in it she says, how can anyone remain interested in a religion which seems to have no concern with 9/10 of his life? And that's really the perception for many people, and certainly non-believers, that Christianity is relevant only for Sundays, but not for during the week. And so the framework of this message I'm going to share with you is taken from Tim Keller's book, Every Good Endeavor.
Sorry, I'm just going to cut in. I can't see your slides. I don't know if anybody else can, but maybe just, I know that we were seeing them earlier, so they're not coming up at the moment.
I'm not seeing as well.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, let me try and share again.
There we go. It looks like it's on its way.
Okay.
There we go. Can see them.
Okay, just get it on from the
then you just go down and maximize in the right hand corner there.
Can you still see them?
We can still see them, yeah. There we go.
Great. Okay, so the framework for the message is taken from this book, Every Good Endeavor. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. So it's going to be in 3 sections, talking about God's plan for work, the problem with work, and then the gospel and work. So the first part, God's plan for work, there's 4 things we'll talk about there. God worked, God delighted in his work, he commissioned us to work, and he put a limit on work. So on the first one, in the beginning, the first thing that we see is God is working. That's the first thing God wants us to know about him. It's the first thing God wanted human beings to know about him when he revealed himself to us. It says, in the beginning, God created. Created is work. And so Keller says, in the beginning, then God worked. Work was not a necessary evil that came to the picture later, or something human beings were created to do, but that was beneath the great God himself. No, God worked for the sheer joy of it. Work could not have had a more exalted inauguration. If you think about how many ways God could have opened the curtain to human history in Genesis, with him sitting on a throne, maybe like Isaiah 6, and angels singing, etc. But God opens the pages of human history with his sleeves rolled up and working. That's the first thing he wants us to know about him, is that he's a working God. So God worked, but he didn't just clock in from 9 to 5. He delighted in his work. So in Genesis 1:31, we're told God saw all that he had made and said it was very good. And there was a 1981 film called Chariots of Fire, where the actor Ian Charleson, who was playing Eric Liddell. Eric Liddell was a Scottish missionary to China. And in the 1924 Paris Olympics, he was believed to have been the fastest man at the time at the 100 meters. But because the race fell on a Sunday, he decided not to run. And instead, he signed up for the 400 meters and then went on to win. But anyway, in that movie, Ian Charleson says, I believe God made me for a purpose, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. So there's something of God in enjoying the work we do and taking pleasure and not just clocking in and clocking out. So God wants us to take delight in our work, not just to clock in. The third thing, God commissioned us to work. So Genesis 1:28 and 2:15, God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. In Genesis 2:15, the Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. So I want you to let this sink in, that the first thing we see God doing is working, and the first commandment or instruction that he gives human beings is not to go to church or raise the dead or heal the sick or feed the poor, is to work. And all of this is before sin enters the world. So just let that sink in. God's idea of a perfect world is God working and human beings working. And that also should give us an idea of, if that's how the story begins without sin, it should give us an idea of how the story ends. But that's a talk for another day. Nancy Pierce, in her wonderful book, again, I recommend this, Total Truth, she summarizes Genesis, those two verses. She says, in Genesis, God gives what we might call the first job description: be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. The first phrase, be fruitful and multiply, means to develop the social world, build families, churches, schools, cities, governments, laws. The second phrase, subdue the earth, means to harness the natural world, plant crops, build bridges, design computers, compose music. It goes on to say this passage is sometimes called the cultural mandate because it tells us that our original purpose was to create cultures, build civilizations, nothing less. This means that our vocation or professional work is not a second-class activity, something we do just to put food on the table. It is the high calling for which we were originally created. The way we serve a creator God is by being creative with the talents and gifts he has given us. And Dorothy Sayers, back to her essay, summarizes this so well, where she says, work then is not primarily a thing one does to live, but the thing one lives to do. It is or should be the full expression of the worker's faculties, the thing in which he or she finds spiritual, mental, and bodily satisfaction, and the medium in which he offers himself to God. And that's just talking about how often we see work as something that we have to do in order to live. But she's saying if we're thinking about it biblically, it's the thing that we live to do, in the sense that God created us for work, for God honoring and God glorifying work. But then the fourth thing is that God put a limit on work. And so in Genesis 2:2, we see God resting. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. And so on the seventh day, he rested. And as we know, God doesn't need rest, but was setting a pattern for us and really emphasizing the importance of not just, so living to work doesn't mean we work all of the time. It means we were created for work, but also within that, God wants us to rest and has set aside a work-rest rhythm for us. And it's just as an aside, an interesting idea. If work is the thing we live to do, then when we think about rest, maybe we shouldn't just think about resting from work, but also resting for work. And what I mean by that is, by the weekend, yes, we rest from a long week at work, but also in our minds, we should be thinking, I'm created for work and there's more work coming. So I'm not just going to rest from my work, I'm also going to rest for my work. and should help us to think about how we spend our weekends and the rhythm of the weekend. So if we're getting to the end of Sunday, tired, exhausted, and just completely finished, we may have rested from our work, but have we been faithful in resting for our work? Anyway, Keller then points out then there's two errors that we must avoid. One is to demonize work, which is seeing work as a curse or a necessary evil. And you'd be surprised how many Christians see work in this way, something that we have to do, something that was there because of the fall. But remember, at this stage, this is all Genesis 1 and 2. There's no sin that has entered the world. All of these realities that we see from Scripture are before sin. But the other side of the horse is that we don't want to idolize work. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So that was God's plan for work. And it sounds wonderful, sounds beautiful, but I know that's not our experience of work, is it? And so we come to the problem with work. And that came in Genesis chapter 3, when Adam and Eve disobey God. And in Genesis 3:17-19, we read, "Cursed is the ground because of you through painful toil." So this was Adam's punishment. Adam being a representative of humanity. "Through painful toil, you will eat from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food." And so what Keller points out here is that sin and the entrance of sin introduces certain things, introduces pain into our work. That's what the thorns and thistles symbolize. It introduces resistance. That's what the sweat of your brow symbolizes. So there's going to be pain from the physical environment, emotional pain, psychological pain, resistance from elements, from corrupted social spheres. But then sin did more than that. It also took away the fruitfulness of our work, the joy of our work, and the meaning of work. So that feeling that we have on Monday morning, feeling of dread that we sometimes have, that wasn't part of the design. That is there because of the effects of sin on work. Points out also that work also became selfish. And in Genesis 11:4, we have a classic picture of this where we're told that the world had one language. And so as they moved eastward, they came to the plains of Shinar and said to themselves, let's build a city with a tower that reaches heaven, not for God's glory, but so that we can make a name for ourselves. So we see that work continued, but no longer for the glory of God, but for the glory of man. This too was part of the effects of sin. Keller goes on, work becomes a way then to distinguish myself from my neighbor, to show the world and prove to myself that I'm special. It is a way to accumulate power and security, and a way to exercise control over my destiny. And then he gives us this sobering conclusion. This means that in all our work, we will be able to envision far more than we can accomplish, both because of limited ability and because of resistance in the environment around us. The experience of work will include pain, conflict, envy, fatigue, and not all of our goals will be met. And because of that, there are two errors that we need to avoid. The first one is idealism, which says, I'm going to change the world, right? I'm going to root out corruption from business. I'm going to root out corruption from politics and start a political party, a Christian political party where there's zero corruption and zero sin. That's idealism. But on the other side, we must avoid, and he's saying we must avoid that because there are the effects of sin, no matter how well we work. But on the other side, avoid cynicism, which is just saying, what's the point? You know, there's sin, the government is corrupt, private sector is corrupt, this is corrupt, what's the point, right? Yes, sin will always hinder, but remember, even within that, there's the promise that you will eat the plants of the field. In other words, we can still make a difference. And Keller summarizes and says, however, all is not lost because the gospel holds out hope, certainly for the future world of work after our Lord's return, but also for the present age as we labor and toil amidst the thorns and thistles. I won't go into these things in detail, but I just do want to highlight them, that we should be aware of dominion theology, Christian Reconstructionism, Kingdom Now theology, and really I think the one in our African context that we are most susceptible to is kingdom now theology, which in theological language is called an over-realized eschatology, which means that it takes the time that is to come when Jesus comes and consummates history, and where the Bible says there'll be no more sickness, no more pain, all of those things would have passed away, and it brings that into the present. And so if you have faith, you should have no sickness. Within the work context, the idea is that we should climb all of the ladders of business and education and put Christians in the top places and fully Christianize everything, then Jesus will come back. We're not called to make things perfect. So this is not what we're talking about. This is talking about being salt and light as believers in the marketplace, to the glory of God, just as he called us to do. Okay, so that was the God's plan for work, the problem with work. Now we get to the final part, the gospel and work. And as we flip to the pages of the New Testament, we see writings like this. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10:31, whether you eat or drink, whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. In Colossians 3:23, speaking specifically about work, whatever you do, in other words, everything that you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. And so what we see in the New Testament is a reaffirming, the gospel reaffirming the original design for work, that work is done as unto the Lord. Work is done for God's glory. And so Paul is not saying, well, if you do this kind of work, then do it for the glory of God. But if you're doing that kind of work, well, then you can do it the glory for your own glory or somebody else's glory. No, no, no. He's saying whatever work you do, whatever it is that you do, work at it with all of your heart because you are working for the Lord. Now, before we just drill down further into gospel implications for work, I want to just talk to us about the hindrance, probably the biggest hindrance towards integrating our faith and our work. And that is something that's called dualism. But before I even talk about dualism, I want to set the stage for that and the thinking behind it. And probably no one better than Francis Schaeffer expressed this. So he says in his book, Escape from Reason, again, which I recommend. So he uses a metaphor of a two-story building to illustrate how modern culture separates truth into two realms. So the lower story represents objective public truth, so science, reason, verifiable facts, where statements are considered universally binding. The upper story represents subjective private truth, faith, personal meaning, values, where truth is seen as relative, often expressed as that may be true for you, but not for me. So in other words, it's saying truth in modern society is there's this separation of truth. And so the bottom, the first floor, you can see where it's dark there, is saying, well, that's truth, that's universal to everybody, okay? Scientific things we can see, touch, proof. But then on the upper story, then that is subjective truth. And so, and I think it was Nancy Pearcey in her book where she says, we as Christians have actually taken on this and made a pact with the world to live in the first floor during the week, and then you see those stairs on Sunday, go up and do whatever Christian-y things that we do. Now, once we embrace that as Christians, the result is dualism. And dualism is this idea that all of life can be separated into two main categories, good and evil, sacred and secular. And so we basically take the bottom floor to be secular or worldly things like work, entertainment, etc., business, politics, etc. And then we take the upper story as spiritual or sacred things, church, prayer, etc. So when as the church we embrace this is what happens. So this view creates a hierarchy where the only meaningful things in existence are those that are in the sacred category. So this is from Darrow Miller's book. And he says, the first manifestation of this dualistic thinking among Christians is a desire for a higher calling. So according to this mentality, it's best to leave the secular arena, to leave the first floor, and go into the spiritual arena so we can be full-time Christian workers. And so you can see there that progression that I've put there, where if a Christian parent, if your child says, oh, I want to go into politics, you'll go, oh, no, that's so bad. But if they say, I want to be a pastor, a preacher, you're excited, okay? And so you can see how right at the bottom, we've got politics, law, and that's lower story, that's secular work, that's thing God doesn't care about. Then you go up the step and maybe you're a social worker and a teacher. It's kind of in the middle. But then if you go higher, and then now you become, and you leave that and you become a church worker or a pastor, missionary, then you're really spiritual. But then the top realm is reserved for those who are not just missionaries, but missionaries reaching unreached people unreached people groups, or people working in the 1040 window. And there's this almost separation of a higher calling. Darren Miller goes on and says the second concept holds that the secular workplace is a place for spiritual outreach. So the idea is that even if we can't be full-time Christian workers, if we can't be up here and we work down here, we should do spiritual activity in our workplaces. According to this mindset, having Bible studies and prayer meetings in the workplace justifies our existence as Christians who are not in missions. It allows us to function in this lower realm because we are bringing the higher realm into the lower realm. And I have a friend who was working for a big company that had a glass boardroom. And so there were these eager Christians who would meet there at 7 in the morning and would be praying in tongues, walking up and down, and people would be coming and not sure what on earth was going on, thinking these people were crazy, just like the Bible says. But that was their understanding that, well, if we're going to live in the lower realm, let's at least pull down some of these spiritual activities into the workplace. And he ends by saying, in many parts of the world where the church is growing, the church is a mile wide and an inch deep. It's forgotten its function of being salt and light in society, of bringing the kingdom of God to life and light in the everyday street and marketplace, and when needed to be a prophetic voice. In this forgetting, the church has become largely impotent. And Nancy Pearcey says the reason it's so important for us to learn how to recognize this secular sacred divide is that it is the single most potent weapon for delegitimizing biblical perspective in the public square today. In other words, if we accept that there is this separation, then we cannot live a biblically integrated life. We have to go up on Sunday, pray, sing, read our Bibles, but then leave all of that and then walk downstairs to our work and take on secular thinking and secular worldviews. I just want to race through some of the consequences of dualism. I know some of you are church leaders. These are some of the things that the impact of the people who we are preaching to every Sunday when we maintain this dualistic thinking. So the people in our churches who are in the so-called lower realms sometimes feel lonely and separated from the life of the church as their busy work schedules prevent them from engaging fully with church meetings and events or volunteering for certain church roles. They feel guilty because outside of work, there appears to be very little time to do things that they think matter to God, spiritual things. They're neutralized as gospel change agents in their place of work because they do not see their day-to-day work as a platform for such change. They apply biblical teaching to their private lives at home and church, but embrace ungodly philosophies and practices which drive their industry and place of work. They rely on the Holy Spirit in their private lives, but do not seek his help, counsel, or guidance in their work. They see the purpose of their work primarily as provision, fulfillment, and perhaps generosity, not as a means to fulfill the chief end of man. Some make the mistake of abandoning their God-given secular job down here in pursuit of some kind of spiritual vocation within the church or a Christian ministry. Many waste their most valuable years of kingdom impact through their work while longing for the day they can pull back from secular work and engage in spiritual ministry. They think, well, one day when I'm not so busy and I've finished all of this work up, then I can go to the upper story and really serve God, not understanding that they are put there to serve God. And then churches tend to highlight, celebrate, and honor spiritual work while failing to recognize and affirm the necessity and value of ordinary Christian work. Again, an example of this is a friend of mine was in a church in Pretoria, a big church, and there was a CEO of a very big company, and he served tea, worked on the tea desk at church on Sundays, and they brought him up and they honored him, but they said nothing about the work that he does in leading a company of thousands and thousands of people. they highlighted, the thing they celebrated him for was that even though he was so important in the lower realm, in the first floor, he was humble enough to serve tea in the thing that really mattered. So for the church, the thing that really mattered is not what he was doing down here. They don't talk about that. They celebrate when he comes and pours tea up here, because that's spiritual work. Can you believe it? Okay, let's move on. So debunking then dualism, saying, no, this is not true. Again, going back to Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not human masters, since you know you'll receive an inheritance from him. So God cares about everything that we do. He cares about generosity to the poor, which we might put generosity to the poor in the second story and put paying employees in the first story. God cares about both of those things. God cares about healing the sick and advances in medicine, technological advances in medicine. He cares about all of those things. The lie of dualism is that this or that thing is sacred or spiritual. But the truth of the gospel is that it's not about this is sacred and this is not. The gospel says you are sacred. You are sacred. And therefore everything you do is sacred. Sacred means set apart unto the Lord. So dualism says this is set apart to the Lord, this is not. The gospel says you are set apart to the Lord. So whether you're holding this or holding this, it is a sacred thing. And to go back to Schaeffer's illustration of the building with lower story and upper story truth, to go back to that, and this actually is a spiritual metaphor. You are the building. So you are the one who is sacred. So whatever is in that building is sacred to the Lord, whether you're praying at church or doing business development or making tables. So Schaeffer emphasized that Christianity is neither public nor private, but total truth relevant to all areas of life, not just private devotion. By rejecting this two-story model, believers are encouraged to integrate faith with reason, cultivating what Schaeffer called a Christian mind capable of engaging in the public square. And Darrell Miller ends by saying the Reformation called the church out of the building and into the world and directly challenged the dualistic mentality of the church in the Middle Ages. In sum, the reformers argued two main points. First of all Christians, not just religious workers, have a calling. Second, all work, not just so-called spiritual work, can be considered a calling. The sacred-secular dichotomy is abolished for all those who embrace this biblical thinking. But then just a warning that as much as we talk about the sacredness of work, we don't want to fall off on the other side of the horse and fall into idolizing work and idolatry. This is Keller in his book, False Gods, says idolatry is anything that we see as more important than God. Idolatry is something that absorbs our hearts and minds more than God. Idolatry is what we look to give only what God can give, meaning, value, significance. An idol is whatever you look at and say in your heart of hearts, if I have that, then I'll feel my life has meaning. Then I'll know I'll have value. Then I will feel significant and secure. There are many ways to describe that kind of relationship, but perhaps the best one is worship. Peter, I shall stop here. So there's about 10 minutes worth of a quick rundown on these things, but I'm aware that our time is nearly up. So I'll be guided by you at this point.
Yeah, you've been going for about 30 minutes. You want to just take a few more minutes, Sibs, just to try and just to land it. I think you're on such a roll here. This is such rich and meaningful. So please, I don't cut it short.
Perfect. Okay, so very quickly then. So a gospel view of work, it helps us to see work as these 6 things. Work as worship, and I'm just going to rush through them. So the Hebrew word avodah, which is translated as work in Genesis 2:15, which we read at the beginning, he put the man in the garden to work it, jointly means work, worship, and service. And this tells us the original design was that our work and worship would be the same thing. So in the Hebrew thinking, one didn't go to work and then go to worship. Worship was work, and we worked as worship. And so that for us, for those who we teach as well, there mustn't be this dichotomy of, I'm so busy at work, I don't have time to honor God. I don't have time to worship him. No. we worship him in and through our work. Number 2, work as culture making. This I pulled out from Andy Crouch's book. He says, I wonder what we as Christians are known for in the world outside of our churches. Are we known as critics, consumers, copiers, condemners of cultures, people who just stand there and say, I don't like that, that's wrong, that's wrong? Why aren't we known as cultivators, people who tend and nourish what is best in human culture, who do the hard work and painstaking work to preserve the best of what people before us have done? Why aren't we known as creators, people who dare to think and do something that has never been thought or done before, something that makes the world a more welcoming and thrilling and beautiful place? And that's a challenge to us. So work helps to create culture, and the challenge is to be at the forefront of that, not just in the back seat saying, you're going the wrong way, you're going the wrong way. Work is also a love of neighbor. Again, in Dorothy Sayers' essay, Why Work? She says, the church's approach to an intelligent carpenter is usually confined to exhort him not to be drunk and disorderly in his leisure hours and to come to church on Sunday, okay? What the church should be telling him is this, that the very first demand that his religion makes upon him is that he should make good tables. In other words, the work that you do matters as a love for neighbor. We had someone many years ago, we were leading a church, and we tasked her to literally make chairs and tables for us. Lovely lady, prayed well, served, gave, but when we sat on the table we got splinters in our bums. And so you sort of think, well, is she spiritual because she prays, but then makes rubbish tables? And Dorothy is saying, our religion should be saying the very first thing that our religion demands of you is to make tables that don't prick people, okay? Make good tables as worship. Work is also an extension of God's work. And in Tim Keller's book, he talks about Luther's larger catechism, where he expounds this verse, give us this day our daily bread, but then ask the question, how actually do you get bread on your table? And when you think about it, someone has to sow seed to grow the wheat, but even to sow seed, someone has to buy the land. But in order to buy the land, you need bankers and insurers. And then you need people to actually open up the ground, or the machines that open up the ground. And then there's the growing, there's the harvesting, then there's those who build barns, and then there's those who transport it, then there are those who have shops, and there are those who work in those shops, and then there's about hundreds of people, thousands of people who need to wake up every Monday morning so that God answers this prayer for you to have bread. And so when God says, he teaches us to pray, give us our daily bread, but how does he answer that? He answers it through the work of the day-to-day work of his people. Similar with security. Work as sanctification, one of my favorite verses, 2 Corinthians 3:18. We all who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory are being transformed into his image with ever increasing glory which comes of the Lord. But then you ask the question, how does this actually happen? How are we transformed into his glory? And I think most of us might read that passage and think it's when we're in our room listening to worship music with our eyes closed, that's how we're being transformed. Actually, if you look at the Bible, the people, how God worked in their lives, God didn't wait for Sundays to transform their lives. It was while they were being shepherds or selling purple cloth or administrating cities. God uses the daily work of our lives to work on us. So God uses our work to work on us. He uses your work to work on you. Work is one of God's favorite tools of sanctification and making us like him. And then finally, work is an avenue for gospel proclamation. Exodus 3:1-3, Moses sees this bush that's burning, but it's not being consumed. And I heard a message when Tim Keller, in a way that only his mind works, talks about how this burning bush was like something that challenged his framework of reality. So his framework of reality is that if a bush is burning, it should be consumed. And so if that was happening, he would have just walked past. But he saw something that confronted his framework of reality, that the bush was burning, but it was not being consumed. And he says when he saw that, he stopped and drew near. And so from that, we can take that if we as believers live out our faith in the workplace, we can be like those burning bushes where maybe you're overlooked for a promotion and people expect you to backbite and complain, but you bless the person who's been promoted over you. And people will think, what is happening? And they will, like Moses, stop and draw near. And that's why Peter says, I think it's 1 Peter 3:15, always be ready to give an answer for a reason for the hope that you have. So unbelievers, as we live our lives as burning bushes in the marketplace, will come to us and demand an explanation for that. Then finally, I'm going to quote from Leslie Newbegin's book called Truth to Tell. He calls Christians undercover agents in the marketplace. And he says the following: undercover agents need a great deal of skill. We do not spend enough time of our energies in training undercover agents. And this is a challenge, especially to pastors. A psychiatrist who was a devout Christian was recently asked whether her Christianity informed her work in the consulting room. She replied, but that would be unprofessional conduct. What kind of preparation is needed to enable a psychiatrist to discern the ways in which her profession could be subverted from its allegiance to other principles and become an area where the saving work of Christ is acknowledged? What would be the specific kind of training for a teacher in the public schools, for an executive in a big corporation, for a lawyer or a civil servant? Do we not need to invest much more of the church's resources in creating the possibility for such training? It cannot be done by clergy, though they have a part. It calls for the vigorous development of lay programs in which these specific areas of secular work can explore together the possibilities of subversion from the kingdom of darkness. I know that much has been said along these lines, and yet there's still so little to show for it. In small enterprises of this kind, in which I have been involved, I found that there was great enthusiasm once the purpose was understood. For undercover agents, it's a great thing to know that you're not alone. And I'm happy to say myself that as I've seen more and more over the years, excitement and engagement from church leaders, from marketplace leaders in engaging this truth and seeing that it's not just a message for a few, but it's actually answering the question, how do I love the Lord my God with all of my heart and my soul and all of my strength? Thank you very much. I'll stop there.
Sibs, that was absolutely outstanding. I think two things that are very evident. One is that you are very passionate about this, and two, that you've done a tremendous amount of research and reading, and we are the beneficiaries as we sit here and we drink of that very deep and rich presentation. I think if we take hold of this, it could make a major impact. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move things along quite quickly. I'm going to put us into breakout rooms where we can answer two questions. We can ask one of these two questions amongst ourselves. The first one would be, what did you hear today or learn today that you didn't know or think before, or how can you apply this? So you won't have time for both, but I will put you into breakout rooms, and to just give yourself, I'll give you about 10 minutes to just digest this, and then we'll come back and we will bring it to a close and a chance just to engage for the last few minutes. We did say 75 minutes, so we still have got some time. It would be great if you could stay on to the end of the call just to make sure that you get the maximum out of this. So please accept the invitation into your breakout rooms. What did you learn today that you didn't know before? Would be a wonderful discussion. So the breakout rooms are there. They're all open for you to go in and enjoy the conversation. I'll call you back in about 10 minutes. All right, well, welcome back. I'm pretty confident that the average comment is going to be there was not enough time. That normally is the comments, and normally when people come back from breakout rooms, they're smiling and they're buzzing. So I really trust that you were able to digest some of that very rich and dense information that was shared, and I mean that in a very positive way. So I think in the sort of the 10 minutes that we would like just to come into land is just to provide an opportunity for maybe two questions, just to have two people. So I'm going to pin Sibs, and if you would like to ask a question and of Sibs, please just put your hand up, and because it would just be helpful for us to process this while we've got this incredible resource, someone who's so passionate on this call. Has anyone coming out of your breakout room and you've got a question that you want to ask? So Clement, I don't know, Clement, if you speak French, maybe Dodzi could help you. Otherwise, so if whoever wants to ask a question, if you could put up your hand, that would be helpful, so that we can hear some further thoughts from Sibs. Here is your chance.
Excuse me, Peter. There was a question that was asked in the chat. I don't know whether you looked at it.
What was that question? Sorry, I didn't see it.
I think it's Rebecca who say, do we need to invest more, in churches' resources, neglecting possibility for church training?
Okay. All right. So that's a great question from Rebecca. So, Sibs, I don't know if you can see it there in the chat. Do we not need to invest more of the church's resources in creating the possibility for such training? Rebecca, do you want to explain a little bit behind that question?
Actually, this was a cut off from Sibs' presentation, but I would want more depth in it if you could, Sibs.
Yes, 100%. I think what's exciting about where we are now versus, say, when my personal journey started maybe 15 years ago, is that there are more and more of these programs, and more people who are dedicating themselves to empower churches to be able to empower their people. And so I think I think it's we need to better ways of finding each other. And I know, for example, there's Ziwani, for those in South Africa, they have a pack that they've built for churches. And so and Peter, this is a bit of the conversation we had, I think about 2 years ago, was if there was one place that churches knew they could go to find these resources. So what I would say, Rebecca, is that the good news for any pastors who are saying, where do I begin, is actually there are many places to begin with, which won't cost you money, but resources are available that can help you to train your leaders and people who actually would also be very happy to partner with you in helping you along. But I think it's an area that I think as church leaders, we do need to take more seriously.
So, Sibs, would you be prepared to put the Ziwani website, or maybe Sandy, you could just put the Ziwani website in the chat just for people to be aware of it? So, Rebecca, great question, because this is such a paradigm shift. So many of the things which Sibs pointed out that we're guilty of, we actually are guilty of. You know, elevating the importance of Sunday and elevating the importance of prayer meetings and sort of downplaying the importance of everyday manual labor or boardrooms or whatever. I see there Wambui is saying Leader Impact is also a good resource to equip. I don't know, Wambui, if you want to say anything about that. Okay, so there's Ziwani.com. Sibs has put into the chat. And Foster is saying Movement Day is one such resource. Foster, do you want to say why are you saying that? Foster from Lusaka.
Yes. Actually, I think having come to Movement Day, I personally have learned a lot from the scholarship scholars program. Those 3 books are just amazing, and just the way the training is done, and the questions you are asked. I mean, the emphasis on the kingdom. I mean, it just changes your perspective of Christianity altogether. So I think I'll take for those like who are coming here for the first time and asking for resources. If you hear about the scholars program, I would encourage them to join. I've learned a lot myself personally. Thank you.
Okay, Foster, so if there was a prize today for the best person on this call, apart from Sibs, you would win that prize, because you're giving the very thing that we wanting to make mention of here, and that is the scholars program that is coming up. I promise you that was not framed. We didn't arrange that, but Foster, what you're raising there is so true, because what Sibs is speaking about is very much the theology and the understanding of Movement Day. So on the 17th and 18th of April, we have our next Movement Day Scholars Program. It's a leadership training course over 2 days, a Friday and a Saturday for 5 hours on each day. There'll be people in the room and lecturers and people attending from all over the world. It's you can see there all the details for level 1, level 2, and level 3. It has a cost of $20 if you come by yourself. That's for all 3 of the levels. So it's less than $7 per level. However, if you get a group of 5 people together from your city, you will only be paying $10 each, $50 in total, because we want you to come as a group, because it is so empowering to be on this course with more than 1 people. And I know Lusaka is a case in point. So here is the information in the other languages as well, just for you to be able to read and to share. We have put this out on the various WhatsApp groups, and here as well, just so that you are seeing the invitation in your own language. But yeah, Foster, thank you very much for raising that. This really is very much the language of Movement Day, and the heart of Movement Day. The Scholars Program, which is a leadership training course, is for people to be equipped with this kind of understanding. So Foster, thank you very much. And Sandy, if you want to just put the link for the registration into the chat, that will also be helpful. That's taking place on the 17th and 18th of April. There's no limit on the number of people. It is available in all languages. There will be literal verbal translation, interpretation in all the different languages. So there is no obstacle. The resources are all available in the different languages. And so we would love you to be a part of it. So I thought I saw a hand up with one last question. Thank you very much, Wambui, for putting the Leader Impact link in the chat. So we really do appreciate that. But someone had their hand up a moment ago before we went to the talking about the Scholars Program. And we'll land with that question if it is still in the room. So I think we've had a very, very meaningful. There we go. So in the chat, you will find the application link for the scholarship program, the leadership training on the 17th and 18th of April. It's 3 levels. It takes place in April and October. And next year in March, we'll be going to Dubai for graduation and for anyone who's doing level 2 or level 3. So if you start now, then you have the opportunity to be doing your level 3 training for 2 days in Dubai in March 2027. So it really is worth your while. You cannot come to Dubai to do level 1, but you can do level 2 or level 3 in Dubai. So we really would encourage you to be a part of that. So I think we've taken in a lot. It has been intense. Sibs, the amount of research that you've put into that and that you've shared with us is immeasurable. We really do appreciate it, as well as your passion with which you share it. And I think the fact that you've spent time 2 decades in pastoral ministry and also now working in business, this really is very empowering. It is a paradigm shift, and I've no doubt that everybody is going to take away. I see lots of applause taking place. People are going to take away something. I see the question there from Wambui to ask, is it possible to get the link to the presentation? So I'm not going to put Sibs on the spot on the call. I'll communicate with him privately. But the actual Zoom call will be available. The recording will be available, and it will be sent out to you. I'll communicate with the Sibs privately about the presentation. As you can see, it's a tremendous intellectual property there, and I don't want to put him on the spot on the call. Sibs, I don't know if you have a closing word that you want to share, and then we'll land and leave it there.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you again just for the opportunity. And I would just encourage you to carry on. There's a lot of the books there that I highlighted, but there's lots of others. Carry on doing your own study and your own research and having these conversations amongst yourselves and your leaders as well. So I'd really encourage you to not stop here and just carry on as you carry on even in this series, just to incorporate this thinking into everything that you discuss. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everybody. Yeah,
thank you, Sibs. And we did have, at one stage, we had about 50-something, and each person on is also a person of influence, and the recording will go out. So I really trust that this is going to be a bit like dropping that proverbial pebble in the pond that goes out across the continent. There's such a vital understanding. So Sibs, for your time and your preparation, your passion, your interest, and then to everyone who has attended and been a part of it, thank you for taking the time. And we really do appreciate it. I trust that those who needed French or Portuguese closed captions were able to do so. But I am going to ask Rebecca, who is there on the call, just to take a moment to close for us in prayer, and then we'll call it to a close.